Her leg brushed against the stick, causing it to fall with a loud clatter. The witches turned towards the noise, their eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What was that?" one of the witches hissed. Miss Bimpe's eyes gleamed as she scanned the room. "We have an intruder," she whispered. On the 1st of October in 1968, as the whole Nigeria celebrated Independence Day, young Labake's world crumbled. The vibrant festivities and the joyous cries of freedom were drowned out by the sirens that heralded tragedy. 12-year-old Labake had just lost her parents in a horrific motor accident. Before I dive into the story, please consider subscribing to this channel and turning on your bell notification icon for more interesting stories. Now, join me as we dive into another interesting and intriguing story. Orphaned and overwhelmed by grief, young Labake was sent to live with her grandmother in the quaint village of Agbaye, far away from the bustling city she once called home. Labake's grandmother, Agbaye, was a stern but loving woman. She was respected in the village, known for her love for God and knowledge of herbs. Despite the warmth and care she received from her grandmother, Labake felt a void that nothing could fill. She cried a lot, always clinging to the teddy bear her mother had gifted her. As days passed, Labake began to notice strange things about the village. Children will disappear for days, but only few returned with no memory of where they had been. Some of the children seemed changed, their eyes reflecting a wild, fearful look. Stories had it that a witch lived deep in the forest, a witch who had the power to transform people and is responsible for the children's disappearance. Determined to know more, Labake decided to investigate. She knew the stories of the witch were more than just tales to scare children. There was something sinister at play, and she felt a strange pull towards the forest, as if her destiny awaited her there. One moonlit night, armed with nothing but a lantern and her courage, Labake ventured into the forest. The trees seemed to whisper secrets as she walked deeper into the shadows. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound, a soft squeaking noise. Following the sound, she stumbled upon a clearing where an old crooked hut stood. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with cages. Labake's breath caught in her throat. Inside the cages were rats, hundreds of them, their tiny eyes gleaming in the lantern light. As she moved closer, she saw something astonishing. Each rat had a distinct feature that reminded her of the missing children. One had a small birthmark on its ear, just like Bola, the baker's son. Another had a tuft of hair that looked like Fumi's. Before she could react, a chilling voice echoed through the hut. "Aha! I see I have a visitor." A tall, gowned figure emerged from the shadows. It was Olokun, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. Labake tried to run, but the witch was too fast. With a flick of her wrist, she cast a spell and Labake found herself rooted to the spot. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed. "Now you'll join my collection." Labake screamed as she jolted from sleep. It was a dream. Her grandmother Agbaye came rushing into the room, her concern etched in the lines of her wise face. Labake, trembling and teary-eyed, narrated her dream to her grandmother. Agbaye listened intently, then took Labake's hands in hers and prayed fervently, asking for God's protection and guidance. "God sends us messages in ways we may not always understand," she whispered. Labake, comforted by her grandmother's faith, slowly drifted back to sleep. The next morning, as Labake got ready for school, she was unusually gloomy. She lingered in front of a framed picture of her mother, her heart heavy with grief. Agbaye approached her gently. "Sometimes God has plans we cannot see. Pray for his guidance always," she murmured, her voice soothing. Labake nodded, taking comfort in her grandmother's words. Despite the unfairness she felt about her parents' death, Agbaye's faith gave her a sense of peace. After a quick breakfast, Labake hurried off to school. At school, there was an unexpected change. A new teacher, Miss Bimpe, was introduced to Labake's class. Tall and striking, with an air of mystery about her. She quickly won over the students, but Labake felt uneasy around her. There was something off about Miss Bimpe that she couldn't quite place. After school, while her classmates eagerly surrounded Miss Bimpe, vying for her attention, Labake stayed away, watching from a distance with a wary eye. The next morning, the village was abuzz with news of another missing child. Pelumi, one of Labake's classmates, had vanished overnight. Labake was perplexed. She had seen Pelumi just yesterday at school. How could she be missing now? That afternoon, while tending to Yagba's goats in the backyard, a rat darted past Labake. Startled, she screamed and fell to the ground, but instead of scurrying away, the rat stayed, its tiny eyes fixed on Labake as if trying to communicate. Frightened, Labake ran to her grandmother and recounted the strange encounter. Once again, Yagba advised her to pray. Labake, puzzled by her grandmother's insistence on praying over a mere rat, muttered a quick prayer and went on with her chores. As night fell, Labake found herself unable to sleep. The recurring dream of Olokun haunted her. Could the witch truly be real? Just then, two rats appeared at her window, squeaking persistently. This time, instead of running away, Labake leaned in closer, her curiosity piqued. The rats didn't behave like normal rats. Their squeaks were insistent, almost as if they were trying to convey a message. Labake watched in amazement as the rats began to scratch out a pattern on a dusty windowsill. They formed shapes that resembled letters H, E, L, P. It read. Labake gasped. The rats were trying to communicate. Her mind raced. As Labake moved closer to the window, the rats remained. They looked at her with knowing eyes. Taking a deep breath, she opened the window and let them in. One of the rats immediately scurried across the room and stopped at the doorway, looking back as if urging her to follow. Frightened but driven by curiosity, Labake followed the rats as they led her out of the house. Moments later, they were standing in front of Miss Bimpe's house. Labake's heart pounded. Isn't this Miss Bimpe's house? She wondered aloud. The rats seemed to nod in response. Hearing her thoughts, they led her around the side of the house to a hidden spot behind a large mango tree. There, beneath the covering of thatch, lay a cage filled with more rats. Labake gasped. She had never seen this many rats before. The rats gestured for her to stay quiet. The leading rat then directed her towards an underground hole. As they moved stealthily through the tunnel, fear gripped Labake's heart, but an unexplainable force urged her to continue. They emerged inside Miss Bimpe's house, a place she now saw with wary eyes. This house is beautiful, she murmured, but the rats gestured for silence. They led her to a strange room. From their hiding spot, Labake saw several women who she recognized from the village. They were gathered in a sinister meeting led by Miss Bimpe. "Welcome, sisters," Miss Bimpe greeted them, her voice smooth but menacing. "You may take off your wigs." The women complied, revealing their bald heads, a symbol of their allegiance to dark magic. Miss Bimpe herself transformed before their eyes, her features becoming more elfin, with large eyes and large ears. "Welcome to our great meeting," Miss Bimpe began, her voice echoing in the eerie room. "I commend you all for your excellent work. The people of Agbaye think they have a god, but we will frustrate them, crumble their businesses, and turn their children into rats." At this, the witches laughed maniacally. Labake and the two rats watched in horror from their hiding spots. She now understood the message the rats had been trying to convey. The rats were the missing children, and they needed a savior. Miss Bimpe continued, "Use these sweets to initiate their daughters and turn their sons into rats." She held up a tray filled with colorful candies. The witch's laughter grew louder and more sinister. Labake's fear intensified, and in her trembling, her leg brushed against the stick, causing it to fall with a loud clatter. The room felt silent. The witches turned towards the noise, their eyes narrowing in suspicion. What was that? One of the witches hissed. Miss Bimpe's eyes gleamed as she scanned the room. We have an intruder, she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. Find them! Panic surged through Labake. The rats, sensing the danger, quickly led her through another tunnel. They moved rapidly, but the witches were not far behind, their footsteps echoing ominously. Emerging into the forest, Labake knew she had to act fast. She needed to warn Agbaye and the villagers before it was too late. The rats scurried beside her, guiding her safely through the dark forests. Labake burst into Agbaye's room, breathless and terrified. It's true, Miss Bimpe is Olokun. I saw her. Agbaye quickly placed a finger on Labake's lips, silencing her. Shh! Be quiet, Labake. Agbaye whispered urgently. She glanced around nervously, then swiftly closed the windows and drew the curtains. Returning to Labake, she whispered again, Keep quiet, my child. Where are you coming from at this hour? And why are these rats with you? Labake, now calmer, recounted her experience in a low voice. She told Agbaye about the rats leading her to Miss Bimpe's house, the hidden cage, and the secret meeting of the witches. As she spoke, the rats nodded in affirmation, their tiny eyes gleaming with urgency. Agbaye listened intently, her expression grave. When Labake finished, Agbaye said, Labake, are you sure you are not dreaming? No, Labake insisted. You can ask these rats here. The rats nodded again in response, their movements deliberate and almost human-like. Agbaye sighed deeply and whispered, Labake, I know Olokun is real, but no one knows her true identity. If what you are saying is true, we must keep it to ourselves until we find a way to expose her. Tell no one what you saw tonight. No one can be trusted. Labake nodded, hugging her grandmother tightly. The reality of their perilous situation weighed heavily on her young shoulders. The next day, Agbaye rose early and headed to the village square. She needed to gather information subtly without raising suspicion. She mingled with the villagers, listening to their conversations and observing their behaviors, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Meanwhile, Labake went to school trying to act as if everything was normal. She avoided Miss Bimpe's gaze and kept her distance from her classmates, who were still enchanted by the new teacher's charm. Her heart raced whenever Miss Bimpe walked by, but she kept her composure, remembering her grandmother's warning. Agbaye's inquiry led her to an old friend, Agbaye, who was known for his knowledge with herbs and his ability to see what others cannot see. She explained the situation to him, emphasizing the need for discretion. Agbaye, we need your guidance, Agbaye implored. If Miss Bimpe is truly Olokun, we must find a way to expose her and protect the village. If you are indeed certain that Miss Bimpe is Olokun, you must find a way to give her food prepared with rosemary or bitter kola. It's that simple. Once a witch consumes such a concoction, her true identity will be revealed. Worse still, if her identity is exposed to a non-witch, all her evil deeds will be undone, including turning the rats back into children. He paused, his eyes serious. But be very careful, Agbaye. Witches are cunning and dangerous. Agbaye thanked Agbaye and returned home, deep in thought about how to execute the plan. The next morning, she invited Labake and her two rat friends into her room. She shared Agbaye's instructions and asked if any one of them had ideas on how to proceed. After a moment of silence, Labake suggested, Rosemary has a very strong smell. The witch might notice it immediately. What if we grind the rosemary and bitter kola into powder and mix them thoroughly? With more bitter kola to suppress the rosemary scent, we could then mix the portion with her food. Agbaye smiled at Labake's cleverness. This is a good idea, but who will put it in her food? She looked around the room and everyone glanced at each other, uncertain. Suddenly, one of the rats squeaked and raised its tiny paw. Labake understood it to mean that the rat would volunteer to sprinkle the powder. Agbaye hesitated but eventually agreed. Alright, we'll go with this plan. The next day, they gathered dried rosemary and bitter kola and ground them into fine powder. With the potion ready, they smiled, feeling hopeful. Agbaye decided they wait until Monday, a school day, to execute their plan so that everyone would witness Miss Bimpe's true identity. At the early hours of Monday morning, Agbaye woke Labake, who in turn gently roused her rat friends. "It's time," Agbaye whispered. She carefully wrapped the powder inside a broadleaf and tied it around one of the rats. Together, they all prayed for protection. Then the two rats set out on their mission, while Agbaye and Labake watched with bated breath. The rats made their way to Miss Bimpe's house and stealthily entered the kitchen. They froze in terror upon seeing a horrible-looking black cat sleeping by the entrance. The rats exchanged a fearful glance. Turning back was not an option. Failure meant remaining rats forever. Summoning their courage, they tiptoed into the kitchen. Once inside the kitchen, the rats located Miss Bimpe's pot of food, but they were faced with a big challenge. Opening Miss Bimpe's pot of food without human hands seemed impossible. One of the rats devised a plan. Despite knowing it might be noisy and risk waking the cat, they hid behind the pot and gradually started pushing the cover away. Just when it seemed the pot would never open, Miss Bimpe walked in, yawning as she had just woken up from sleep. The rat quickly hid as she opened the pot and put it on the cooker to heat up, slightly leaving the cover open. She walked away immediately, leaving the food to warm. Seizing the opportunity, the rats emptied the contents of the leaf-wrapped powder into the food. However, the powder looked obvious. How could they stir it without being noticed? Just then, Miss Bimpe walked back in. The rats quickly hid again. Unknowingly, she stirred the food, mixed the powder in completely, and turned off the cooker before leaving the kitchen. The mission was a success, and the rat quickly zoomed off unnoticed. At dawn, students, teachers, and parents, including Agbaye, gathered at the assembly ground. It was an open day for the school. Labake, with her two rat friends hidden in her bag, looked on anxiously. Miss Bimpe seemed fine, showing no signs of transformation. Labake wondered if they had made a mistake. Agbaye too was worried. The head teacher announced that Miss Bimpe would conduct the morning devotion. Everyone applauded. Miss Bimpe was popular. As Miss Bimpe mounted the podium, she suddenly felt strange. Trying to remain composed, she struggled to control the growing unease within her. The crowd watched in confusion and awe as Miss Bimpe's composure cracked. Her expression twisted, and before anyone could react, she removed her wig, revealing her bald head. In an instant, she transformed into a monstrous rat. Agbaye screamed, "She's a witch!" The students looked on terrified. In no time, Miss Bimpe, now Olokun, shrunk into a small rat. In the midst of the chaos, Olokun was vanquished as she tried to escape. The crowd trampled on her and she died instantly as a rat. Her reign of terror brought to an end. Throughout the village of Agbaye, similar transformations occurred. All the witches turned into rats, and all the children who had been turned into rats returned to their normal states. The students, teachers, and parents, still reeling from the shock of Olokun's revelation, watched in amazement as two rats jumped out of Labake's bag and immediately transformed back into children. The crowd marveled as the two children hugged Labake, thanking her profusely. As the dusk settled and the sun rose on a new day, gratitude filled the hearts of the villagers. Labake and Agbaye, hailed as heroes, were thanked for their bravery and sacrifice in the battle against evil. The two children who were formerly rats were not also left out. The villagers, once divided by fear, now stood united in victory, their spirits emboldened by the triumph of light over darkness. As Labake sat on Agbaye's bed, the early morning sunlight filtering through the window, Agbaye asked her gently, "Do you now know why you came to Agbaye?" Labake looked up, her eyes bright with understanding, and smiled. "To save the rats?" Agbaye chuckled warmly and nodded. Yes, to save the children who were turned into rats. But more than that, you were meant to uncover the truth, to bring light into the darkness that had befallen our village. Your courage and determination showed us that even the smallest among us can make a significant difference. This story shows that everyone has a purpose, even if it's not clear at first. It teaches us that courage and resilience can help us find our true calling and make a difference. No matter how tough things get, our actions matter and can bring about change. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more interesting stories, please consider subscribing to this channel, not forgetting to turn on your bell notification icon so that when next a video is being posted, you will be the first to be notified. Like, share, and drop your thoughts about the story in the comment section. You can also check out those videos here. I promise you won't be disappointed. Till we meet again in my next video, remain blessed.